educated, but I'm so frustrated. Hello to my loneliness. I guess that ignorance is bliss. Take me back to before the new.
Alrighty. Hello, beautiful. Hello, handsome. And welcome back to another episode of Life After Infidelity podcast. I am your host, Brianna Latrice, your favorite affair recovery coach. And I am here to help you navigate life after infidelity. Because whether you choose to leave or stay, both decisions will be hard. And I am here to help you navigate your heart. And so, you guys, this is part two to an amazing conversation that I've been having with Harrison and Hannah. And, you know, the first episode was just really laying down that framework, help you get an understanding and some context. And now we're going to get into the good stuff of the restoration and giving you some tips and tricks that you can use if you are experiencing infidelity in your marriage, but you're wanting to stay and work things out. And so we are back, and hey, Hannah. Hey, Harrison.
Hey guys.
Yeah. So, you know, I just kind of want to pick up where we left off. You know, we were talking a lot about you guys sharing your story of how Harrison, you went through emotional infidelity with the same person over time. But, you know, you might have had a couple of occurrences of emotional infidelity and then it went into physical. But what we were talking about that kind of led up into that is that, you know, life happens to us all. And you guys were definitely having life happen to you. You know, you were talking about just the birth of your second child. It was your daughter, right? Your daughter.
Yes.
Yeah, just and your daughter having a lot of health issues. And I can only imagine what that's like being in and out of the hospital with your baby, with your infant. Hannah, you were just coming out of postpartum. And then, you know, Harrison, you shared too about, you know, some of your battles that you were dealing with pornography. And then I know I'm missing something here, but just really talking about like how all of this life has happened to you guys. And, you know, it kind of just, I know what I want to say too. Just, Harrison, you just talking about too, like how you kind of maybe felt alone, or you would take some of Hannah's comments that she said and you kind of felt like, okay, well, she won't care anyway. And you were kind of like playing, you know, this angel versus devil within yourself when you were thinking about, you know, the acts, even though you knew that they were wrong. And so that's kind of just where I want to pick up. You know, you guys were dealing with a lot. We talked about the emotional piece of it. Just kind of walk us through now, like what led to you actually, Harrison, going into the physical piece of it, because I think it's important too, like where Hannah, you shared, like when you were holding him hostage in the car, so to speak, you know, and you were just like, but you trusted him, you know, you said you didn't blow up and you just told him, this is what's required of you to help me rebuild this trust. You need to end communication with her, you know, and all of this stuff. And now, you know, you trusted him to actually do that, but then it transitions into the physical. Like, kind of walk us through what led up to that.
So going back to our daughter being in and out of the hospital, I had a position open with a sheriff's department up in her hometown, the other girl. And so the position came, we took it, but that was going to require me to move up here. What was it, 3 or 4 weeks before you guys could come
it was
here?
longer than that.
Yeah, it was longer than that.
It's like 6-8 weeks.
So it's roughly, 1 to 2 months I was up here, working, trying to find a house to buy and stuff like that. And, I think we thought we were okay in that time in life.
Well, we had the communication prior to applying for the job. I flat out asked him, because where he was, we were in a very small sheriff's department, and they weren't staffed adequately. They didn't always have proper equipment. And we had several instances back to back where officers had gotten stuck in some really, really tight places, which caused us to just kind of look at each other and go, if we stay here, you're dead. There's just, it's not safe anymore. Yeah. And we knew that there were only a couple of places within the state where we could make this transition and be okay financially. And one of the places was currently where where we are and where the other woman lived. And I knew that. And so I asked him, I said, hey, look, is that going to be a problem?
Yeah.
And I was very blunt with him. And I was, at this point, we had been rebuilding since then. So this is almost a year since the emotional affair, and no other issues had come up as far as I knew. And I just said, look, is this going to be an issue? And I need you to be honest with me.
Okay.
And he said, no, it's not going to be a problem at all. That's closed. There's nothing going on there. No, it's fine. It's not going to be an issue. And I said, okay, well then I trust you.
At this point, like, lying through my teeth, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's very clear, is that this was something that I wanted to conceal because I did feel like it wasn't ever going to go that place. And so I was okay with, at that point, just hiding what I had and telling her everything would be fine. So the poker face at that point was fine because I believed in what I was doing.
Yeah.
You know, and so I was fully okay with just keeping that part hidden. So anyway, so we moved.
You knew you weren't going to go any further with her, or you knew you were?
Sorry. So knew that
he thought he had control of the relationship and it was nothing but a friendship.
Gotcha. Okay.
We both did. Yeah. So we both did at that point. You know, the other girl, she's like, listen, I'm not a homewrecker. That's not part of what, and even when we were dating years ago, we never had intimacy. We were just friends. And so that's where we thought the relationship was going to maintain. Fast forwarding, right? So we move up here, get the house done, and it's our son's fourth.
Well, the whole time, for almost a month prior to you coming up here, plus the whole time you were here, y'all were seeing each other.
Yeah. So the whole time we were here, there was communication.
Yeah. So I was at home. I was 2.5 hours away, taking care of both kids by myself, packing up the entire apartment, doing everything alone while he was up here. And the whole time he was up here, he was seeing her. And I had no clue. So like you said, fast forward, me and the kids finally get up here, and it was rocky. I mean, the whole time he was gone, it was like hell. Yeah. And
that's me getting pulled back into that conscious state of like, I need to expose this.
Yeah, because
to keep it hidden.
I had so much understanding, and I just kept telling myself, look, I know it's bad right now, but if we can just all get back together again, if we can just all get back in the same house again, it'll be fine. Like, this is just really stressful. We've all been in this transition. Like, it's okay. Like, she was not even on my radar at that point.
I'm glad you say that she wasn't even on your radar at that point. And, you know, one of the reasons why she probably wasn't on your radar is because I've heard you say in your story, just because you were at home. So you were, you know, really in that sense, being both parents at that point, because Harrison wasn't there. And then you were having to take care of 2 children, you know, and you were just dealing with life. And so your focus, like you even said that, of your focus had become your kids. You put your kids before your husband. And I think it's really important to have this conversation too, because I know that men are like suffering in silence, and they don't feel like, you know, they're missing something in their marriage. And I think that's important to mention too, you know, because Harrison, that was one of your things, like, that you would say was just like, you didn't feel needed. And even speak to that, especially for men, when you don't feel needed in your marriage, like how that kind of plays into you know, going and getting this attention because somebody else is making you feel needed. Like, kind of speak to that too.
Sure. So I'm actually working on something. You don't know about this yet.
Great.
So
see,
I'm
no secrets over here. Yay.
Well, it's an internal speaking topic that I'm working on currently. So you guys hear it first. I've been putting some stuff together about that exact topic, you know, suffering in silence, but I don't want it to come across like all the freaking videos I watch of men are victims of something. We're not. Okay. We are victims of something, sure. But in this case, the videos that I watch specifically that kind of hit this or tug on that internal heartstring, it's like, well, we don't talk about things because no one else cares. What do you mean no one else cares? She cares, right? Yeah. Other people care. My friends care. So I'm really having to be careful of how I put this together. So thanks for asking this question, but I don't know that I have a completely composed answer yet. I'm still digging very deeply into that. However, Yes, I very much, in the beginning when I met Hannah, I said if I died tomorrow in the line of duty, which would be the most noble death of any law enforcement officer, right? That's kind of, we almost dream for that. It's sick and twisted, but it is. It is what it is. But I knew she could pick up and move on in life. You know, I knew she could pick up and find another man, and a man good enough, a man better than me that could raise my kids and maybe be a better dad than I was. Which is hard to say today, but in that time, that's kind of what was going through my head. And so she was doing such a good job running my boat, right? My ship, my helm. She had the reins, she had it, and she was doing it all. She was running the crew, she was driving the boat, she was making sure it was washed and cleaned and kept a sail, and that tore, so we got to fix it. And I just went to work. And so I'd go through these traumatic incidences and come home and realize she's doing such a great job that I'm just not going to add to that. And so, go ahead.
Well, in the meantime, I feel like I'm killing myself, and I'm resenting him because he's not doing anything but going to work and then coming home and sleeping and playing video games and going to the gym or, you know, whatever. Like, we were not even his priority. Like, all he did to contribute to our family was work. And so, but I also didn't see the flip side of that is that I also didn't trust him to be able to take care of our kids. I didn't trust him to be able to do what I needed him to do to make sure it was accomplished. And so I essentially worked him out of the job. So yeah, I'm doing all these things, killing myself, and I'm pissed at you for it. But I'm also not making you feel needed. Like, I'll, you know, never forget one thing I share often. But before I go there, but as a first responder family, that is something that we have to do. Because when they're on duty, we have to take over. We don't get a choice, because with first responder work hours, it's not like a 9 to 5. Like, but you also have to pass that back over to him, because according to the word, he is the head of the household. And anytime that is out of balance, your household is not going to function well. And
well, and balance goes both ways there, which we speak a lot to priorities.
For sure.
So I want to get real quick on priorities. My priority was my job. Okay. Followed probably very closely by physical endurance, appearance /
hobbies.
The availability to be able to perform at any moment in my job. You know, so my literally, you know, in the law enforcement, especially first responders, firemen, very much so, that your physical fitness is determinative on your life out there. You know, even because they'll tell you, it's like, even if you're shot in the line of duty, if you're in poor cardiovascular shape, you're more likely to die than if you're in great cardiovascular shape and one of your lungs collapse. You're able to pull enough oxygen to the opposite lung to be able to live through the encounter. And that just, those things stuck with me very, very deeply. So my priority was my work. And then very secondly, my physical fitness. And then all the other hobbies I had, whatever they may be, video games, shooting, whatever. So my priorities shifted. Her priorities shifted, not out of not loving each other, but out of like just coping with life. And that took so that drove me into your question of not really being needed, because I wasn't needed in my house. She had it. If I died tomorrow, she was going to pick up and move on. She was already doing it all.
But the reality of that was it that correct, it wasn't true. I needed his help. I just couldn't get it. And you know, I'll never forget, we had been in some financial strain, and so I had taken a part-time job where I was working like 8 hours a week. And so one of the afternoons that I worked, he would keep both the kids, which was rare. Very rarely did he ever have the kids alone, because I just didn't trust him. And my daughter was young. She was 6-8 months old probably. And again, we'd been through the whole year of all these health issues in and out. And usually I was meticulous when it came to scheduling, when it came to, I mean, I am, but not as bad as I was then, because for me, sequence was life. So if the more efficient I was, I didn't have to work as hard. So the night before, I would make up the formula canisters. So I had enough canisters to get me through the whole day, and I wasn't scooping formula in the middle of the day or at bedtime or whatever. And that day, something had happened, and I was out of sorts, and I had left the formula canisters empty. And so I went to work, and when it was time for her afternoon bottle, he didn't have formula canisters. So he didn't know how much formula to put in the bottle. And he called work, and he said, "Hey, you didn't make formula. So number one, he immediately accused me. So
Mhm.
that triggered me, made me defensive. You know, you didn't put formula in the canisters. How do I make her a bottle? And I remember lighting into him. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you're so distant from your family that you don't even know how to feed your own child. Like,
Yeah.
how pathetic are you? Like, that's probably not exactly what I said, but that's exactly what I meant.
That's how it came across.
Yeah, that's it. I made sure of that. And I look back on that. I was so hurt, and I was so exhausted, and I was so tired of being understanding and not being the priority that was one of those times where it's like, I just don't care. You're going to get a taste of your own medicine today.
Oh, wow.
But I now look back on that now that we're in a healthier place, and I go, good grief. Like, how did that make him feel? Like, our child was 8 months old. And he didn't even know how to feed her.
Yeah.
Like, that's how insignificant I had made him feel in our lifestyle. And that's how unneeded I had made him feel in our family.
Yeah.
Let me say, none of that is an excuse for my actions.
No, but that was in the defense of, again, that was one of those things that had come from a healthy place because I had taken on so much at home because I knew how hard his work life was in that moment. He was working 60 hours a week. And you know, I had taken on everything I could possibly take on to make things easier for him. So when he came home, he could just rest or do what he wanted to do or fill his own cup. But over time, as Satan does, he morphs those things into, that's not the reason anymore. And this, what I thought was this good thing has turned into this really negative thing. But now we're too far down the hill and we've committed. So what do we do now kind of situation?
You know, I think it's a great thing to reflect on. You reap what you sow, and it's such a, it is as small as it is, the littlest things over those 7 years of life. Really, just they grew into some really ugly. They grew into kudzu. If you're anywhere from the South, you know what kudzu is, and it is a weed that takes over and obliterates everything it touches. It will overgrow anything. And it's one small seed that will literally overrun a city. And that's what happened is we had just little things, and they ran into this horrid beast, right, that came out in the end. And so, but I hope that answered your question on the needed part.
Yeah.
No, I mean, look, then it just puts me into something else because it's like, that's the thing. It's really just a small buildup of things that then make a person just do something that no one ever gets into a marriage thinking, oh, I'm going to cheat on my husband. I'm going to cheat on my wife. You know, but it's like over time. And even I want to ask you guys like this question, like, would you say that you guys maybe lacked communication because it was like, you know, you were sharing, Hannah, how you just didn't trust him, Harrison, and it showed, like, you didn't say it, but your actions showed it, and he could feel that, you know, and that was received. And then Harrison, you even talked about how your priorities switched, and your priorities were, you know, your job, your health, your fitness, and all of that. And it's like, I think that's kind of been one of those disconnects that as I'm working with clients, is it's like, okay, but did you communicate that? Because it's like, if you would have communicated, hey, I don't feel like you trust me, allow me to, you know, have a more active part in the family, or hey, I don't feel like you're making me a priority in the family, you know, and the kids. So really talk about that too, because would you say that was kind of like one of those underlying issues too, is just the communication?
Yeah. So before we go into communication, because I think that's a whole nother block that we really should address, I want to go back to, just so we can complete the infidelity story and then go into the recovery, because the communication is huge in our recovery.
Okay, good.
So once we got everybody moved up here, is what, Heath's 4th birthday party?
Yeah, Dave's 4th birthday.
For July 4th, 2019, okay, Independence Day. That's the day we set our marriage free.
That's our anniversary. We're insane.
Anniversary.
It's one of those days that, like, we're never going to forget it. It wasn't a random Tuesday in March.
It actually was a Tuesday.
Yeah, well, so I mean, it's July 4th. So I mean, we're never going to forget that day. So we choose to celebrate it instead of dread it.
Yeah.
And so we're lunatics and we have an affair anniversary just like we have an anniversary because we were liberated. Our marriage was liberated that day from what we had built it into to what God had constructed it to be for us. And so it truly is something that's worth celebrating to us. And so I think that's important to note though, because it's so easy. Like I've worked with a lot of spouses who have these affair stories as well. And it's like, man, like how do we get past that day? How do we get past not just dreading that day every year? It's like celebrate it. Like you learned something, didn't you? Survived something.
Exactly.
Like celebrate the fact that your marriage has new life. And so yeah, we create.
That's so true because there's someone else that I follow who she specializes in affairs, and she even says that she's like, if your marriage can recover from affair, you actually have, like she was saying, how her clients that actually stay together and work through it, like they kind of are thankful for the affair because it has made their relationship even stronger. So I totally get why you guys say like, hey, let's celebrate this.
Yeah.
So even the night, actually the day leading before, I had a couple, actually the week, I had some couple really hard calls, which we talk a little bit about what I call, or what clinicians call, micro traumas, and they're little traumas over time that add up to something big. You know, I could nail down 5 or 6, 7, 8 true trauma incidents, and I'm like, man, that was hard, you know, and some of those stick with me. But I forget about the micro things, the little things, the glimpses or the moments that I'm like, wow, that's a little trauma. So, but I did have a really hard week, that the week of work before the affair, and even the night before, you know, I didn't even share that with you, and you know, so because I didn't want to bring that trauma back to the family, and I shared it with her, and she's like, hey, why don't you know, come over, we'll talk about it, whatever. And I was like, cool. We even said in text, it was like, listen, I do not want to ruin this friendship with intimacy. You know, I want to keep it as friendship. And of course, less than 12 hours later, that's no longer friendship and it's intimate.
Well, and it's also important to note the kids and I were gone. So we had left earlier in the week.
That's right.
To go see my dad, because we had actually lost my stepmom a few months prior to that. And my dad was having a hard time being alone. And so I knew Harrison had to work that week. Again, I stayed at home. So I said, hey, the kids and I are just going to go ahead and go down a few days early and spend the week with my dad so that, you know, he has some company and the kids can see their grandfather and I can get ready for the party and not have to transport everything from here. I'll already have it there. And so the kids and I were gone. So that also allowed for some opportunity there.
Well, lack of communication is, I should have been like, well, I needed her, looking back now, I needed Hannah more than her dad needed Hannah at that time. But I couldn't bring myself to say that at those times because I knew how much she needed to go. And she did. She really did. Again, that perfect storm, though. It was just right place, right time. Devil worked it all out to where it's like, hey, here you go. And I ended up sharing that experience with someone else rather than my wife. But that is the lack of communication that we had grown into over the years.
Well, and part of that goes back to is I think some of that is true, but at the same time, at this point, you were already in love with her, I believe.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And so all you had to do
already in love with her.
Yeah.
Just over the emotional affair built up over time. And again, it was one of those things where I didn't realize that connection had grown so strong, but I knew it had because of my text message prior. It's like, I don't want to ruin this with intimacy. And we both agreed. It's like, that's not going to happen. We just want to keep it kosher and friendship, you know?
Well, because the reality is all you had to do was pick up the phone and you could have shared that with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you chose not to. You chose to go to her instead. So that's a part of that emotional connection that I was talking about earlier. It's like making those small choices of, hey, this is a really important thing.
Well, let me make this connection. It's like a sheet of paper, right? So think about an 8.5 by 11 white sheet of paper, printer paper, and you rip a little tiny piece of corner off of it and hand it to somebody else. That 8.5 by 11 was Hannah's. She that's her page. She married that. That's her 8.5 by 11. But I ripped off a corner and gave it to somebody else. And over 7 years I don't think it was 7 years, but over about the 5-year period of connection with this other woman, what did I have left? Half a page? 3/4 of a page? Do I have any of it left? So at what point through all the communication did I have any, and who had it? She had it. So at that point, when she says like I was in love with her, in those moments, I for sure felt that way. And that was a lie. That was a downright straight out of the pit of hell lie. But that's because I've given over half of my paper maybe to this other individual. And now she was holding all these little tiny pieces of paper. Yeah. She can't write on it. She can't put it back together. She can't make it whole. Hannah still had the whole sheet of paper, right? Even though it was torn and withered down to not much, that she had the only whole thing left. And so I think that now would probably be a great time to go into that communication. And
well, I just, how the whole affair thing played out is by the time he had gotten there with us, he was volatile. I mean, like volcanic, volatile.
For sure. I want to ask about that because I've noticed that a lot of men who do, cheat on their partners, they do kind of become like a bit aggressive. Like what's behind that? What's the why
anger,
behind that?
So the portrayal of anger, so it's like, hey, you have water. I need to boil water down and I need to know what is water. It's 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. I can prove it. Okay. Anger is fear. Yeah. Anger is the front emotion to the underlying stasis of fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's all it was, is I was scared that it would get out. I was scared, what I had lost. I'd lost half of this sheet of paper. I'd lost half of me, right, into this relationship. So I had lost something. So there's fear there. And so that the volatile side to a lot of these men coming forward and showing bats of anger is fear. That's what it is. It's fear.
Fear. Is it like a bit of guilt too, would you say? Or
oh, for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, and we always say fear is a secondary emotion. Sorry, anger is a secondary emotion. When you're angry, there is something underneath that driving it. Yeah. So that's what we talk to a lot of couples. It's like you've got to stop yourself and say, hey, I'm pissed at the moment. And then you've got to take a real reflection and go, hey, I'm angry because I'm hurt, because I'm scared, because exactly. It's, so for him, it was his way of controlling the narrative because he knew that if he could keep me down, then I wouldn't ask questions. And so it was his form of trying to control me. And it worked for a minute. Yeah. But then not only by the time it knocked me down, because that afternoon, he ripped into me like he had never ripped into me before. Verbally. Yeah. Like
never beat her.
Again, never physical abuse, but there was definitely emotional and verbal abuse. And so he had whittled me down to absolutely nothing that night, told me how horrible of a wife I was, how I didn't respect him or care for him at all, how horrible.
What was that? Like, what happened to build that up? Did you say something or he just kind of just, okay, you said something and he
had been very edgy the whole time. And again, we were in the car and we were stuck. And so I pinned him to the ground and
she's physical.
He verbally. And he, usually I expect a certain reaction out of him when I do that. And I didn't get that reaction that time. I got something more. And so that alone, I had my moment where it ripped me apart. We were 2.5 hours away. By the time we got back to his parents' house, which is where the birthday party had been, he immediately got in the car and left me and both the kids there by ourselves. To make the trek home alone. Oh, wow. And I'll never forget, my father-in-law, I was obviously just in tears the whole time. And my father-in-law looked at me and he said, Hannah, the only thing I can say is, again, we're from the South, right? The pig who squeals the loudest is the one who needs the most attention.
That's really good.
Yeah. And so that, as soon as he said that, I cleared it and I begged it. I was like, look, I want to stay, but I know I need to go home. So I packed the kids up, got in the car, called one of our best friends on the way. And I just said, look, I'm pretty sure she's back. And so got to the house that night. It was late, got the kids in the bed. And again, I had had 2.5 hours to gain my courage. I walked in the door and pinned him to the ground verbally again and said, "Is she back?" And his response was, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Okay, now I know. You didn't answer me, but you did."
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Harrison, stop being stupid. Is she back?" And so that's kind of what kicked the whole thing off. And he came out with small truths at first. At first, we only went this far, and then we only went this far until eventually the whole thing came out. And a lot of people listen to our story and like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how you responded the way that you responded." I'm like, "Girlfriend, you got to get me first. A whole lot of hell came out first." Like,
and you said that you guys kind of had those hard conversations like in one night. So
we hit the ground running.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't.
She really had the hard conversations at night.
Yeah.
I at that point had I tried to leave, except without leaving. I left emotionally and like in person. I just was not there. But she really did push those hard conversations. A lot of our recovery, to be honest, was her sticking it out and not necessarily forcing change, but standing ready for the change to happen for me.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the big things for me was I had been living this life with him for probably about 3 years, and it felt like the horror merry-go-round. I mean,
what do you mean this life? Like just this disconnect that had kind of like this build up?
Just this turmoil. That's the honesty of what it was. I mean, it was
the bouts of anger.
Oh my gosh. It was like I was constantly on a roller coaster. We were fine. And then it would just come up out of nowhere and he'd be explosive again over nothing. And, I told my friend, it's like living with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I never know what I'm going to wake up to.
I love that you say that, because that was something in my marriage that I would always say. And I'm not gonna lie, I even told my ex-husband, I was like, "You're a demon to me," because it was that thing of like, I didn't know who I was gonna get. And some days I would just ask a simple question and he would just go off on me. And so I love that what you said your father-in-law said is that the person that screams the loudest is actually the one who needs the most help. And I want to ask this question. So just to make things clear, like for you, Harrison, just the physical, it just only happened one time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And Hannah, I want to ask you, because there are women out there who are dealing with this. And I want to know what would you say to these women? Because, you've dealt with the emotional occurrences a couple of times, more than once. And now you've just been exposed to that has crossed over into physical. And so you've given Harrison your trust over and over and over again. So at what point did you decide, or how did you even get the strength to be like, okay, I'm going to give him one more chance, even though this one, would kind of seem like the worst because it's a physical. What did you use, and how can you encourage other women?
Well, for me, it kind of goes back to what I was saying a second ago. We had been through this really 3 years of really, really difficult marriage where I was dealing with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And probably about 3 months prior to the finding about the physical affair, we had a really bad, Mr. Hyde episode where he was just unreal. And I finally just started praying to the Lord. I was like, "Lord, like I can't keep doing this. Like, where is the man that I was promised? Because this isn't it. Like, this is not the godly man that I married. So where did he go?" And I just remember praying, "Lord, whatever it takes, knock him to his knees. Like I've prayed everything else, whatever it takes, knock him to his knees, but just spare my family." And less than 3 months later, I had an affair on my doorstep. And so after I had that huge, obviously fleshly response to valid fleshly response to everything that was happening, I just had felt the Lord tell me, this is it. Like, this is what it took. Are you going to stick with it or are you not? And I immediately said, okay, if you're promising me that what I'm getting at the end of this is what I've prayed for, then okay. And so I remember him, after we had that huge explosion, he did leave. He walked out the door with his phone, said, "I'm going for a walk," and left. What I didn't know at that point is he had called her.
Mm.
and told her that I had found out
Mhm.
and what to do. What should he do? And I'm grateful for her to this day because she said, "You don't have another choice. Go home to your family."
Oh, wow.
And he said,
Her exact words were, "Well, it sounds like you have a marriage to rebuild."
Wow. So that's a whole nother story, to tell you the truth, because some people
yeah,
don't even get that opportunity, because yeah, they just don't get that opportunity. But I love to, like, just how you said that, because part of my story is similar, is because I was like talking to a couple of my close friends, and I was just like, man, I know that divorce is, it's not good. God doesn't want divorce. And I was like, but I'm getting to a point in my marriage where I just don't want to be in it. And I was like, it's getting to a point to where when I was praying during my prayer time, I wouldn't even say anything, because I even felt guilty just saying, God, get me out of this marriage. And one of my
yeah,
friends was like, well, Bree, God knows your heart anyway. So
right.
just speak your
Absolutely.
truth. Just speak your truth, And I
Yeah.
love that, because people don't understand that part of my story too, because part of my story is his girlfriend we were still married, and this is his girlfriend. They've been together for 2 years. She approached me, but she approached me the day after I prayed to God to send me a sign. And people were always like, well, she was disrespectful. She had no right to approach you as the other woman. And I always tell people, what you don't understand, I asked God to give me
Yeah.
something that was going to give me the strength to know if I can work this out or if
Right.
I can leave. And that was that. And I love how you're even sharing that too in your story of, like, you were just asking God, hey man, just like show me. And you said, like, within that, and it's a blessing that I'm saying that to say, I feel like that was really the culprit for that, because even how the other woman responded, it showed like all of that was in alignment for now you guys to be, this is your purpose. Like, to me, that's how I'm taking this, is like, man, this going through this experience was your purpose, because you prayed about it, you got your answer, and then this other woman, just went away. And so
Yeah. Well, approached him calmly and quietly.
yeah.
And he said, like, he talks about it now. He's like, I was scared. Like, I literally thought you were about to kill me.
Yeah.
Like, no, I just found Jesus in the middle of your walk. And
Which I mean, in defense of myself here, she did say, you've done it this time, and told me like all this plans that she was leaving, and
oh yeah,
anyway. So
I had told him, I said, you have done everything but try to kill me over the last few years, and I have hung on, but you finally did it. I'm done.
Yeah.
And but I told him, I said, okay, so I just need to know, are you going to stay or are you leaving? Like, you have a choice, and I'm not telling you, I'm giving you the choice. And he's like, you mean I get a choice? I'm like, yeah. I mean, you're the one that gets to choose. I'm not going to make you stay, but if you want to stay, you can.
Yeah.
And
so that's what starts this restoration of you guys, and kind of speak to that. I do want to ask this question before we even go into the restoration piece, because I even heard in your story, like, Harrison, where you were like, for 2 days she had to listen to you say you were in love with this other woman. And how do you even still want to rebuild when someone tells you that they're in love with another woman?
So, sorry, that's yours.
Yeah. Well, for me, it was every time I heard him say that, every time he would say it, I heard the Lord say, it's not true. I mean, and I don't know how you get through this type of situation without having faith. So that's my experience for someone who asked me, how do I handle this? And they don't have faith. I don't know what to tell you, because I don't know. I really don't. But my experience with the Lord there, I've often related to, it has to be what Moses felt like, or what, Elijah felt like, where it's just like, you're right there seeing the face of God. Like, because it was just so close, and I heard him so clearly through that whole instance. It's like, literally, I was in the palm of his hand the entire time. And so every time Harrison would say that, I just would hear the Lord say in my heart, it's not true. And so it almost just, it hit me, but it didn't devastate me.
Yeah.
And, and I made some really vital choices during that time frame, that had I chose to handle it differently, the whole relationship would have gone differently. And so you heard Harrison talk about our friendship. And
Mhm.
that was the thing that I struggled with the most, was that, man, he was my best friend. There was nobody else in this world that I was closer to than him.
Mhm.
But it was the exact same person who had hurt me
I know.
beyond belief. But somehow in my mind, I was able to separate the two.
Yeah.
So every time I fell apart, he was the one who had to hold me until I got it back together. And so
Wow.
it was also accountability for him. Like, look, you did this. And
Mhm.
so you have to hold me and you have to help get me through this because you did
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And so I made that very vital choice. Instead of turning away from him in those moments, I turned into him. And
Good.
that is where, like you talked about communication earlier, we had terrible communication prior to that.
Yeah.
Anytime I tried to bring a problem to Harrison, he got explosive. Anytime he brought a problem to me, it was borderline abusive. And so we just communicated really, really terribly. And so that was the first time we really had started to understand how important communication was going to be in getting through this.
Yeah. Yeah. And even Harrison, for you, because I heard you say earlier in the conversation, like, you realize now you weren't in love with her. But at that time, you really, like, what made you really believe at that time you were in love with someone outside of your wife?
I think it was just that I had given over so much.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that paper analogy, it's how do I recover that? Where did it go? It had to go somewhere. So if I gave that little piece to somebody, even though they had all the broken pieces, it's still me wanting those pieces back. And the only way I could have those pieces back is if I had the person. And so I think that's the split in my brain of saying I want this or want that. I had the most whole thing here for sure.
Yeah.
Still do to this day, but I had the broken pieces over there. And so I think that love separation or the word love.
Yeah.
I love her too. I think I lost something that was of value, and I want it back, and I
Yeah.
can't get it back. And so, I think does that make sense how I'm saying that?
Well, and I think it's also understanding it's the difference in love as a feeling and love as a decision.
Yeah.
Talk
So
about that. I don't think people really understand that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the hard part about our feelings, right? I mean, again, that's back in the scripture, the heart lies. And so understanding that your feelings lie, they don't tell the whole story. And so do I believe that he loved her in feeling? Absolutely. She was giving him a lot of validation that he was not getting from me. And Harrison will be the first person to tell you that in that stage of his life, he was a very self-centered person. And it was all about, what are you giving me?
Very vain.
Yeah, very vain. And
which my personality leans there pretty heavily anyways, but it was very much amplified.
Yeah. And so she was giving him a lot of things that he wasn't getting from me anymore because I was angry. There were parts of me that were bitter. And when you don't deserve I remember telling him, if you want he's like, you don't respect me. And I remember looking at him and saying, well, then do something that's respectable, but that's not biblical either. Like, I should respect him regardless of his actions because that's the role that the Lord has given him in our family. And that's hard to do.
Yeah.
And so I think in feeling, he loved her because she was giving him a lot of things. But over time, eventually, that feeling would have disappeared and he would have been left with love as a decision, which is what we were currently having to do. That's the choice I was having to make was, I don't love you at all right now based on my feeling. But as a decision, I love you and I know the man that you're capable of being. And, that's something that I pray to this day, because as humans, we all get lost in this world from time to time. We all get lost in our feelings and our emotions and our consequences and, our trauma. But I ask the Lord on a regular basis when I start feeling distant from Harrison, Lord, remind me who he is in your perfection.
Yeah.
Because what I'm saying right now is not who he is.
Yeah.
And it's also an exercise I use with my kids when they're not behaving in the way they know that they should. It's like, look, you've lost who you are.
Yeah.
So let's talk about who you are. You're kind,
Yeah.
you're loving, you're compassionate, you're strong, you're all these things. You're obedient, you're all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's find who we are again. So I ask the Lord on a regular basis, hey, I feel like I've lost him, Lord. Remind me who he is.
Yeah.
Because what he's showing me is not who he is, but I know who he is because I know who he can be in you, and you have his heart.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
to go to your communication question, I think, I promised you in the previous episode I'd give a tip here for something that would be great in restoration of this marriage, and that is, you better be willing to understand that you're going to have the hardest. If you're in this for the change, if you're in this for the good, you need an understanding that you're about to walk into the hardest thing you've ever done in your entire life,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be the easiest thing you've ever done in your life, and that is, you've got to be able to. You're never far gone as you think you are. You're never as far gone as you think you are. You're always one step away from restoration. I think that's probably the best tip, or the best way I could put that tip, is understanding that I may walk 10,000 miles in the wrong direction.
Yep.
But if all I do is turn around, if all I do is turn my back to the direction that I've gone, I'm already back to restoring, and I'm so close to getting that done. Is that turning around moment, that is the hardest thing you'll ever do.
Absolutely.
Because you have to slay pride, you have to lay yourself down, you have to die to flesh to be able to turn around and say, okay, I'm willing to walk away from the 10,000 miles, worth of exercise that I've gone in this direction, and all the progress or money or fame or whatever I've done that way, to turn around and say, okay, I'm willing to respect and try to get this back on track.
Wow. I love that. You're only one step away from restoration. And it goes into beautifully what you said, like, love is a decision. And so I will say, like, that's beautiful. And I knew we were going to get into more, but for the sake of time, and I want to be respectful of you all's time, but I do want you, Hannah, to say, I heard you say about the 3 questions that you and Harrison would ask each other, at the beginning stages of this, and kind of share those questions with people.
Yeah, so that kind of falls into communication too. And I said we're really poor communicators. And so one thing that we came up with on our own, I don't even know where it came from, the Lord, I guess, but we had 3 questions we asked each other in the beginning day. It was multiple times a day. As life goes on, maybe once a month, every 6 months, now that we're in a healthier place. But the first thing we would ask is, what do you need? So that is going to be something that if you ask these questions, you have to meet that need, because that is something that if nothing else gets done today, this is the one thing I need from you to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel loved, to feel whatever word you want to put in the blank.
Yeah.
So that can be a physical need, that can be an emotional need, that can be a spiritual need.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, what do you want? So obviously there's a difference between wants and needs. Everybody's familiar with that when you talk about finances and things of that nature. So a want is something that is a desire. It is something that, hey, it would be extra icing on the cake. It'd be the cherry on top of the sundae if I could get that too. But that doesn't mean that if my husband asks me for physical intimacy for the 3rd time in 4 days, that I have to feel that want. That I just, doesn't mean that I have to be ugly about it. It means, hey, I just don't have the energy for this today. Can we do this tomorrow? Can we, whatever? I wouldn't say, hey, this is your want. No, I can't accommodate. I would try to say, hey, yeah, I hear you want. I'm too tired today. I have too much on my plate, whatever. Can we move to another one?
Yeah.
And then the last one is, how can I help? So this tends to be an action. So this can be, you can unload the dishwasher, you can bathe the kids, you can pray for me, you can pray with me, you can, whatever.
In those first stages, that how can I help, generally we're like, especially in our recovering, was her just saying, you can hold me, and just, and
I love that.
crying and hold her or whatever.
Or you can give me your full attention. You can, whatever. And so it's important to also say those 3 things can be really hard to answer at first.
Okay.
And, that was like, some of it kind of stemmed out of the people we were working with our affair recovery, which just happened to be my in-laws. So my mother-in-law asking us, what is your greatest need? And so in the very beginning, I'm angry and bitter. My greatest need was to keep it in his pants. That's my greatest need. I literally told my mother-in-law that sitting on my couch. So it can be really hard at first to come up and take these things seriously and kind of get to the root of the real answers to these questions. But the more you practice it, the more you're vulnerable and the easier it gets. And so, and this can be something you can do over text. We will have it, or we'll write it on our bathroom mirrors with a dry erase marker so that we can read, if schedules are in conflict or, whatever. It's easy to put these things into practice if you make the effort of the practice.
Yeah. That's so good. I want to say thank you guys for just coming on here, sharing your story, and being of encouragement to so many other people. Hannah, I even heard you say, like, when you're willing to tell your ugly, it will help others to tell their story. And I think that is what you guys are doing. That is the heart behind Life After Infidelity. And Harrison, one of the most powerful things that I heard you say in your talk, and don't forget, everyone, if you want to hear more about that talk or the talk in full, it will be embedded in the link. You can click the link below and it'll direct you there. But I even wrote it down. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I took an envelope, like a bill. It was so good. But you had said that there's grounds for divorce and there's grounds for forgiveness. And I thought that was just so powerful. And I think how we're ending this today, it just sums that up beautifully, that you're only one step away from restoration. You can make the choice to stop, pivot, and turn all the way around, because love is truly a choice. And that is like, that's I think that's the beauty, and that's the energy of this talk today, is that love is a choice and you're only one step away from restoration. And Harrison, with you being the first male to tell your story on my podcast, and I even told him that I was going to let him close it out, but I would not tell him what I was going to have him to say. But my heart, I tell people all the time, I love love, and I love healthy love. I love seeing people restored and actually operating in the way that marriage was intended to be. But I really want you, Harrison, to just close us out, speaking to those men who are hurting and who are suffering in silence, or who may even be acting out in anger because of fear of the actions that they have done. And so I'm just going to remove myself, and I'll just allow God to use you to minister and witness to these men that may be going through that.
Well, the biggest thing I would say is vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is power. Vulnerability is courage. And through hearing our story, I hope that you see that. I hope that you see that us being vulnerable here is not cowardice. It's standing in front and saying, it's taking charge, it's taking the reins back, saying, I'm going to take my actions and hold myself accountable, or I'm going to take my actions and forgive myself and place them at the feet of Jesus, or place them at the feet of my wife and seek her forgiveness. But that would be the biggest thing I would say is understand that vulnerable men are not weak men. Vulnerable men are very courageous and strong men. And I've had to lay a lot of that down. I was grown up, and even in law enforcement, you can't be vulnerable. You can't show weakness. And that's the difference, is vulnerability and weakness are never the same thing. They're quite opposite. When you look at the nature in and of itself, some of the most vicious animals prey as victims. They prey as if they are vulnerable until that moment comes, and they know that they're more deadly in vulnerability and that they're not weak. So understand that vulnerability is strength and power. Understand that vulnerability is courage. And that would be what I say to you, is be vulnerable, be open, and be willing to take accountability of those actions. And the more vulnerable you are, and I think the more vulnerable I've been with you, you have really come to see a side of me that wasn't there for a long time.
Absolutely.
I think that's it. Thanks, guys, so much for having us here, and thank you, Bree, for having us. It's been an honor. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. You guys, it's been another amazing episode of Life After Infidelity. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And I will see you, beautiful souls, in the next episode.